Good evening, good day, and greetings to everybody. Welcome to this year's final episode of the Indian Interest Podcast. So, as is customary for us, let me first greet those of you who are on the live chat right now. Let's see who all is there. I can see Prasham, Unnati, and Dugu Video, Sriram Mohan, Eddie Ebenstein, General Dyer, Bhavna, Ram Samir, Yashas, Aryan Saini, Shivaji Ithape, Siva Verma 111, Aghora, Samarth Acharya, Amanjot Singh, Pankaj, Atul, Kanishk, Akash Dikshit, Durga M, GK, Deepegs, Debosman, Arnav Carpenter, PJ Deb Burma, Richie, Arun, Rajat Chopra, Anup, Divya, Abhishek, Jasman Raj Singh, Bhavna, Bhavyadeep Rathore, 8B15, Anish Kumar, Lone Rider, Vaibhav, Jimmy, SS Up, Melvin, Ronald, Divya, Kanishka, lots of other people, Amol, Anmol, Aditya, Pankaj, Suraj, Vladimir, Stalin, Zhong Jina, Akash, Ajay Kumar, Satyam, Priyanshi, Shivansh, Tejas, Max, Anil Chaudhary, Aditya, Venkat Raman, Rajagopalan, Aditya, To the Moon, Diablo, and lots of other people. Swati, Shubham, Karthik, lots of Adityas tonight. Shagun Chopra, Pankaj, Devanshu, and everybody else. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. So, this is the final podcast for this year, and we're gonna do a year in review. We're gonna do a recap of the year 2022, the main important events that happened from my perspective. Obviously, I can't cover everything, but I'll talk about some of the major events that are important from our perspective, and I will also speak about what could happen in the year 2023, what to look forward, what should we look forward to, right? So let's talk about the things that happened in the year 2022. So we went into the year 2022 with the world reeling from the coronavirus pandemic, the pandemic that began in Wuhan, China in 2019. So the world went through these multiple waves of the pandemic, including India. Overall, India did far better than most nations. India, I would say that India dealt with the pandemic far better than most nations. And yet, the economy suffered. We had these multiple lockdowns, we had multiple waves. So the world overall was reeling from the coronavirus pandemic, some nations more than others, and so on. So that's one of the things that was already there when we came into the year 2022. We also had the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The US withdrew from Afghanistan, handed over power to the Taliban. So that is one of the major things that happened in the previous year. And going into the year 2022, we had this shadow hanging over Ukraine. The Russian buildup was visible on the borders of Ukraine, and the buildup was getting stronger. The military buildup of Russia on the borders of Ukraine. So that's what we had going into the year 2022. Now, I'll go through some of the things that happened in the year 2022. I have my notes in front of me so that I don't miss anything. So, in January 2022, the number of COVID cases worldwide exceeded 300 million. Yeah, 300 million cases were exceeded worldwide in January 2022 itself. And the COVID pandemic threw up a lot of interesting and strange circumstances. For instance, in January, you had the Australian Open tennis tournament, and the world number one Novak Djokovic was deported from Australia after being very badly mistreated, and his crime was that he was not vaccinated. Yeah, so that is something that kind of surprised and shocked the world. And what's very surprising is that a few months later, in the last quarter of the year, in October, you had there was this T20 World Cup, Cricket World Cup in Australia, and you had this Australian cricket player Matthew Wade who had tested positive for the virus, and he was made eligible to play in the Australia-England match at the MCG. The match ended up being abandoned by rain, but this is a clear case of double standards. Even in the Commonwealth Games that happened in England, the Commonwealth Games gold medal match between India and Australia, you had an Australian player, Talia McGrath, who had tested positive, and she was allowed to play in this match. So very strange case of double standards that we witnessed in the very beginning of the year with the treatment that was meted out to the world number one, Novak Djokovic in Australia. Um, so yeah, there was a strange and rather interesting and curious start to the year, considering the cloud of the pandemic that was hanging over the entire world. Then, as we know, we had cloud the dark cloud hanging over Ukraine, and this burst into rain, you could say, on February 26th of the year, when the president of Russia, Mr. Putin, ordered the what he calls the special military operation in Ukraine, which the rest of the world calls the Ukraine invasion. And that began on February 26th. And initially, most observers believed, most if not many if not most observers were of the opinion that the Russians will steamroll Ukraine in a matter of days or weeks. They will flatten Ukraine the way the Americans are used to flattening various nations through the shock and awe massive bombardment campaign. The Russians did none of the sort of that sort of thing. Their invasion was very precise, very slow, very deliberate. Of course, over the first main city that they captured was Kherson, and over time they captured various parts of Ukraine, the Donbas region. Eventually the Donbas was reintegrated or integrated into Russia through a presidential decree. And then you had the withdrawals from various parts of Ukraine that had been captured by Russia, principally in Kharkiv, and then later in Kherson. And right now the situation is kind of stable, kind of stagnant. It's like the calm behind before the storm. uh, the Rasputitsa season, the mud season, is kind of getting over now. We are now officially in winter. So most analysts believe that there could be, or there will be, a massive winter offensive by Russia, perhaps in January, which is next month, and that could kind of be the next phase of the Ukraine conflict. And yeah, so that's the situation that we are in right now. So one of the major events of the year 2022, which has affected the entire world, has been the Ukraine invasion. It has very rapidly reshaped the world geopolitical map, and it's kind of brought into sharp relief and detail where various nations, their allegiances lie. It has brought into sharp focus the various geopolitical fault lines in the world. It's become very clear what the EU is, what NATO is. It's become very clear where India stands. India has and now has a very clear and strong independent foreign policy. India has refused to accede to the demands of the West or of anybody else in this matter. uh, the West has imposed all kinds of sanctions on Russia, and yet the Russian economy is doing okay. It's not doing very poorly. The Russian ruble has become stronger because they tied it to the price of gold. The Americans have imposed an oil price cap recently on Russia. India has refused to accede to that oil price cap. Russia has now prohibited oil exports to nations that insist on the oil price cap, and so on. So all of these things happened in the year 2022. Uh, it was a it was a pivotal event, the Ukraine invasion, and it was something that was threatening to happen from the mid 2010s onward, 10s onwards, especially after the regime change operation that the Americans effected in Ukraine, the so-called Maidan Revolution, which was essentially a coup against the elected government, and it installed a puppet regime of the US in Ukraine. And then later, Mr. Zelensky was placed, or he was elected to power, whatever you want to call it, and now he is essentially uh, well, he's an actor who is performing essentially every day. He recently went to the US, met the US President, Mr. Biden, and so on. So that's the situation where we are in. It's been a very pivotal event in world geopolitics. In the future, when histories are written, they will talk about pre-Ukraine and post-Ukraine, the history of the world in that shape. So it's been kind of a defining point in world geopolitics, and the geopolitical alignment configuration of the world has very rapidly changed after this thing, after the invasion of Ukraine. So this is a situation that is still in play, and it looks like the Russians could have a major military offensive, winter offensive, may most likely in January next year, because by February, March, you have the second Rasputitsa season, the spring season, in which you have mud. So if you want to have major armored advances and tank advances in a nation like Ukraine, in a territory like Ukraine, you need to do it when the ground is firm, which is when the ground is frozen in winter. So most likely that's what we are going to see. And it's like I said, it's brought out India's foreign policy in sharp relief. India is now a nation whose voice has weight, whose opinion has weight, and whose actions reverberate across the entire world. India is a nation whose actions, to a certain extent, have a significant impact on world geopolitics. So, so it's been a pivotal year for the whole world, including for India. It's brought India's economy into sharp relief. The Indian rupee is now a currency that is significantly in focus. So all of that has happened post February 26, when the Ukraine invasion happened. And it's also brought out the inherent strengths that Russia has as a nation. As we know, Russia is a major, very it's the largest nation state in the world right now. It straddles Eastern Europe as well as the entirety of northern Eurasia. It is the mythical heartland of Mackinder, right? It contains about 50% roughly of the entire world's natural resources, which makes Russia what is called an autarky, a nation that is self-sufficient in all essential commodities and all essential items, such as things like agriculture, things like minerals, metals, oil, gas, steel, all the things that you need to be self-sufficient as a nation. Russia is one of the few nations that has this advantage, and that's all been brought out and brought out into focus as a result of the February 26 Russian invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions that were imposed on Russia by the West. And Russia has been able to withstand these sanctions quite strongly. So that's where we are vis-a-vis the Ukraine invasion. It's something that is still in progress, and it's something that India needs to keep a very keen eye on, because it's going to affect how 2023 goes as well. Yes. Uh, so that was in February 26. On February 26th this year. Then in early March, we had this curious incident of an Indian Brahmos missile that made its way into Pakistan. So the Brahmos missile it's, I mean, India hasn't confirmed whether it's a Brahmos missile or not, but from the photographs that we saw and all, it's quite clear it was a supersonic Brahmos missile. So the missile was launched from Sirsa in Haryana, and it made its way into Mia Channu in Pakistan occupied Pakistan Punjab for now. Yeah, the missile flew 120 plus kilometers inside Pakistani held territory for more than 3.5 minutes, and then it made impact on some kind of residential area where you had buildings, but no people were killed as a result of this the firing of this missile. So India gave a statement that this was a technical malfunction, and India said this was deeply regrettable. We did not intend to do this, but it kind of exposed certain aspects of Pakistan, of the Pakistani military, certain capabilities, whether they are able to monitor Indian missile launches, what kind of reaction time do they have. It brought everything out into sharp detail, right? So the missile took less than 4 minutes to inside Pakistani territory to impact the target. And there was no reaction from Pakistan, whether in the sense of any counter missile launch, an attempt to bring the missile down, or some kind of retaliation from Pakistan. There was absolutely nothing. The Pakistanis complained on Twitter in a press conference. They showed the trajectory of the missile, the path it took. It took a sharp turn towards the west and entered Pakistan. All that. It looks like they were able to track the missile, but they were not able to counter it, to bring it down, or to retaliate in any manner. Obviously, it did not go towards any vital installation, but even if it did, there was no time for them to react. So I've said in the past that whenever there is a war, whenever there's a war the next time between India and Pakistan, that next war has to be the final war. between India and Pakistan. And India needs to ensure that the outcome of the war is decided in the first 5 minutes. So, this accidental missile launch into Pakistan took less than 4 minutes. It hit the target within less than 4 minutes. Let's say it was accidental, like we have officially said, and all that. We had an inquiry, internal inquiry, and some statement was made. But yes, the missile reached its target in less than 4 minutes. So if you so that kind of tells you that India is very much capable of ensuring that the outcome of the next war is decided within the first 5 minutes. One Brahmos missile launch, accidental launch, has made it quite clear. Now, the Pakistanis obviously will have learned some lessons from this. So, this is maybe it was an accidental launch, maybe it was a demonstration of what the Brahmos can do for potential customers, potential clients, maybe it was something else, but this is what happened. We have the facts are very clear. It was a launch from Sirsa, Haryana into Pakistan. It hit a place in Mia Chunnu in Pakistan occupied Punjab. 3.5 to 4 minutes, less than 4 minutes, and more than 120 kilometers inside Pakistan, the missile was able to fly. So it was a missile that did not have a warhead. The missile, the impact was purely kinetic. There was no warhead on the missile, either conventional or not. So that's what we know. It's an interesting event that happened, and it's kind of it tells us about Pakistan's capabilities. It tells us about India's capabilities, and yes, this could be something that will be kept in mind in the next war, whenever, if it happens, right? Now, talking about Pakistan, we also know what happened in Pakistan in April. So, so the day that the Russians launched their special operation in Ukraine, that day, Mr. Imran Khan, the ex Prime Minister of Pakistan, that day he was on a visit to Russia, that day itself. And it is on that day that Mr. Putin announced the special operation in Ukraine, the special military operation in Ukraine. So Mr. Imran Khan did meet with Mr. Putin briefly. I don't know how long the meeting was. It was a brief meeting. It was not of great consequence. And that meeting kind of set the tone for the eventual ouster of Mr. Imran Khan from the post of Prime Minister of Pakistan, which happened in early April. I think it happened on April 9th. So on April 9th, there was a no confidence motion in the Pakistan parliament, or whatever it's called, and Mr. Imran Khan was removed from power as a consequence. And a couple of days later, Mr. Sharif, the other Mr. Sharif, Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, was appointed the Prime Minister of Pakistan. He is the brother of the previous former Prime Minister, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who is currently in exile in England. I think he stays in London for now. Yeah. So his brother, Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, who has been the Chief Minister of Pakistan occupied Punjab for a few terms, he has now been made the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and he has kept a very low profile. He essentially reads out from a script, and the other thing that happened as a consequence of this is that Pakistan is now very much firmly back into the US camp. For about a decade or so, Pakistan was a Chinese vassal state, and we have seen the consequences of that. The China-Pakistan economic corridor, the investments that the Chinese were supposed to make into Pakistan, which have not quite fructified. Yes, all of that was happening, but the Pakistanis were referring to the Chinese as their iron brother. Mr. Imran Khan visited Beijing, and he met with Mr. Xi Jinping at least once, I believe. So there was close coordination between Pakistan and China. There are reports of the Chinese having established certain uh, outposts of, or whatever you want to call it, within Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Some portion of the China Pakistan economic corridor passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir, illegally occupied Indian territory temporarily. Yes. And there are reports of the Chinese having soldiers stationed within Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So all of this was a very clear indicator of the fact of the fact that Pakistan was China's vassal state. They were depending on China for economic succor and all that. Yes, SUCCOUR, by the way, or OR. So they were relying on China for that. The Pakistan army essentially owns the country, and the Pakistan army always needs sources of funds, which typically come from outside. So they are a mercenary army who serve a very specific geopolitical purpose because of the way Pakistan has been constructed and the kind of territory it occupies. the overall aim of Pakistan is to cut off India from Central Asia and to be a bulwark against the rise of India for whatever power is employing the Pakistan army as a mercenary organization. So China did it for a decade, and then now the Americans are back in the saddle with the ouster of Mr. Imran Khan and with the uh, appointment of Mr. Shahbaz Sharif as the current Prime Minister of Pakistan. So Pakistan is now very firmly back in the US camp. Pakistan is now a US vassal state. That's one of the important events that occurred in 2022. And as a consequence of the newfound relationship between Pakistan and the US, we are seeing that the Pakistanis have been taken off the FATF grey list. The French had a significant role to play in this, and nations like South Korea and Japan are now investing significant amounts of money into Pakistan. And we also know that the Americans are offering the Pakistanis an upgrade package for their F-16 fighter planes. The Americans are also referring to the illegally Pakistan occupied part of Kashmir temporarily as the so-called Azad JNK. That's the kind of statement the American ambassador to Pakistan made. So we are seeing this very uh, stark turn that the US Pakistan relationship has taken. The Chinese are trying to salvage something from what they can from their erstwhile relationship with Pakistan. So the Pakistanis have also gone begging to China once again for more money or for a loan waiver or a deferral of the loan repayment and all that. So that some relationship still exists, but Pakistan is now very much firmly in the American camp. So they will do what the Americans tell them to do, and that's something we need to keep an eye on, right? um Now, I remember in 2021, I had I have done multiple podcasts with Ranveer Allabadia. It's really fun talking to him every time. So I think in one of the first conversations I had with him, I had rather unfortunately referred to the 2020s as the decade of the virus. I had said it's likely that it's not just one virus that is causing trouble for us, the Wuhan coronavirus, but there could be more viruses. So I had said that the 2020s could end up being the decade of the virus, and I hope I am proven very wrong in that. But in May, a new virus raised its head, the so-called monkeypox virus. So the WHO in May declared a monkeypox outbreak to be a public health emergency of international concern. So the monkeypox virus is different from the coronavirus, the Wuhan coronavirus. The monkeypox virus is first of all a DNA virus. The COVID-19 virus is a RNA virus, and the monkeypox virus has a double-stranded DNA, and the COVID-19 virus has a single-stranded RNA within it. Right, so it's quite different. So the monkeypox is now a public health emergency of international concern. There are more than 80,000 cases thus far as of today. I think more than 83,000 cases as of today, and approximately 20 or so cases have occurred in India. So it's something that all nations are keeping a close watch on, and it's something that we need to ensure doesn't go out of hand. And so, yeah, that big alarm was raised in May by the WHO, and one hopes that the international community can get its act together and ensure that this thing is stamped out before it becomes anything worse than what it is. Yeah, so I think overall the situation is under control. See, at any given point in time, there's always a bunch of viruses circulating around the world. Viruses, bacteria, protozoans, and whatnot, all kinds of microorganisms that cause illnesses amongst human beings. Malaria has always been a thing. Dengue has been a thing for a long time. There are other older illnesses like tuberculosis and what are the other things? There are various illnesses that have always been around. So all of these illnesses and outbreaks, some of them are essentially endemic to some parts of the world. These all have to be constantly monitored and essentially dealt with. So maybe the monkeypox is just one of these. Ebola has an outbreak in Western Africa, Southwestern Africa from time to time. So all of these, every region of the world has certain viruses or certain microorganisms that are harmful to humans that are endemic to the place. So it needs to be it needs to be monitored very strongly, very thoroughly, constantly monitored. And So yeah, the monkeypox was declared as an emergency. Thus far, it's been under control, and one hopes it stays under control. We don't want any more of this nonsense. We have had enough of the pandemic business. So that is a thing of concern that occurred in May. What else occurred in May? So first of all, in March this year, we had the Sri Lanka problem. The beginning March of 2022, there were these protests all across Sri Lanka. There were shortages of all kinds of essential items and commodities in Sri Lanka. Shortage of food, so shortage of milk powder, shortage of fuel, rolling blackouts, large parts of the country without electricity. Sri Lanka was essentially going bankrupt under the rule of the Rajapaksas. Uh, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president at the time, and Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa was the prime minister. So these protests eventually came to a head, and in May this year, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned as the prime minister of Sri Lanka in early May. And a couple of days later, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe became the new prime minister of Sri Lanka. Now, the thing is that Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe is an old hand at Sri Lankan politics, and he is also an old Western hand. He has been involved with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, whatnot. He is deep into all this. So it's not like it's some new hope for Sri Lanka. It's just another iteration of the same old politics. One doesn't see any bright young politician emerge out of Sri Lanka. It's always a case of recycling older politicians. It's either Basil Rajapaksa or Gotabaya Rajapaksa or Mahindra Rajapaksa or Ranil Wickremesinghe or somebody else from that vintage. That's what keeps going on. So yeah, that's what happened in May. Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa resigned from the prime ministership, and Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe took over a couple of days later. That was in May. Now, this is something that's not over in May. It continues. So we'll talk about it again in July. In July, on the 8th of July this year, there was the extremely unfortunate event in Japan, the assassination of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Mr. Shinzo Abe has been the longest serving Prime Minister of Japan in the post World War II era. And he is the one prime minister who wanted significant reforms. He wanted in Japan. He wanted he was in favor of changing amending the constitution of Japan, which has been written by the invaders, by the occupiers, the American occupiers. He wanted that to be amended. He wanted Japan to develop a proper army instead of the self defense forces, very limited self defense forces that it currently has. He wanted Japan to once again have the right to wage war in defense of its national interests, and so all of that, So he was a very nationalistic politician. He was the only politician who was capable, if at all, to take Japan in a positive direction. As we know, since 1945, Japan has been under permanent and very strong US occupation. Permanent US occupation. The Americans have more than 120 permanent military bases on Japanese territory. Nothing happens in Japan without American consent. Whatever low level, small internal decisions have to be taken, the Japanese can do that on their own. But any major decision within Japan has to be taken only with the approval of the United States. Yes. Um, that has been the case in Japan. The monetary policy, the Bank of Japan, everything is controlled by the Americans. We had the Plaza Accords in the 1980s, which essentially ended up ruining Japan's economy. Japan had become the second largest economy in the world. It was threatening to displace the US. That's how vibrant and energetic the Japanese economy was, and it's been totally ruined. Uh, so Mr. Shinzo Abe wanted Japan to become kind of independent of the US eventually. And so Mr. Abe he for some reason inexplicably stepped down from the position of Prime Minister of Japan a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago. Don't remember exactly when it was. It was not very long ago. He voluntarily stepped down. He said that he has health issues and he needs to step down. And then the revolving door of Japanese prime ministers again started. Currently, who is it? Mr. Kishida is the prime minister currently. Let's see how long he lasts. So Mr. Shinzo Abe voluntarily stepped down. Maybe he was made to step down for whatever reason, and in July this year he was assassinated. And and it is now being said that the assassin acted alone. He had some mental issues, and that's it. So we have to understand that assassins hold a gun typically, and they use a gun. But we have to also understand that the assassin himself or herself is also a weapon that somebody else uses. So typically the investigation will end at the motives of the assassin himself, that yeah, he had so and so mental issues or so and so beliefs, and that's why he did this. But it won't go beyond that as to who may be controlling or influencing that person. Yeah. And whether that person was simply a pawn in somebody else's hand. So none of that has happened. The explanation that's given is that this person had certain motives of his own, something to do with some church or something or other. It doesn't really matter, and the matter has been closed at that. So the question is, who did it benefit? It clearly benefited the whichever forces are there in Japan which do not want any change to the status quo. So it benefited those. So now Mr. Kishida is in power. The Shinzo Abe's party won the next general election with a massive majority. It now has the wherewithal to change the constitution of Japan, but no such thing is on the cards. Yeah. So Japan has gone back to the status quo, and there is no politician, Japanese politician, on the horizon who can match Mr. Shinzo Abe's stature and who wants to take the actions that Mr. Shinzo Abe wanted to take for the sake of the Japanese national interest. So that was and Mr. Shinzo Abe was genuinely a friend of India. I always say that there is no friendship in geopolitics. I always say that, but in certain rare cases, one can see an exception, and Mr. Shinzo Abe was most likely an exception. He was genuinely a friend of India. Yes, he was not doing it just for the sake of India-Japan cooperation in geopolitics, shared interest and whatever. There was some genuine warmth on the behalf on the part of Mr. Shinzo Abe for India and India as a civilization. There are civilizational ties between India and Japan. So I would say that India, first of all, it is a great tragedy for Japan that they lost a great leader of his caliber, of his stature. His loss is essentially irreplaceable for Japan, and India also lost a really good and strong friend. So it was a double tragedy from that perspective. Yeah. So that's something that happened in 2022. Very, very regrettable, very unfortunate. Uh, in July, we also had the first images from the James Webb Space Telescope. So typically, I talk about geopolitics, but just putting it out there because science is one of my, if not my primary interest. So yes, we had the first images coming in from the James Webb Space Telescope. In just a few months, it's kind of not upended, but revolutionized our understanding of the universe, and it's thrown out new data that kind of changes everything we have thus far understood about the universe. Uh, the mission was launched on Christmas Day in 2021. It went off flawlessly. The telescope is now in its final position. It's sending back science data. It's been hit by a meteoroid, but they have been able to make the instrument work, and hopefully it stays operational for a long time, hopefully longer than what has been planned, and it's definitely already revolutionizing our understanding of the universe. So that is good news overall. So now I spoke about Sri Lanka. Then in July, so Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the president of Sri Lanka. Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, his brother, resigned as prime minister in May, replaced by Ranil Wickremesinghe. This is in May, and in July, just a couple of months later, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the rest of his family, they fled from Sri Lanka. The protests became more, what would you call it, became stronger, and eventually Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa resigned from the presidency of Sri Lanka, and he and his family fled on a Sri Lankan destroyer, naval destroyer, a warship, as if it was their private property. And I'm not quite sure where they are now. It doesn't really matter. Yep. So that's what happened in July. And after Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled from Sri Lanka, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe replaced him eventually as the president of Sri Lanka. And that is what the status is as of now. In July, at the end of July, on 31st of July, we also had this news that came out of Afghanistan that Mr. Ayman al Zawahiri, who was the boss of Al Qaeda after the death of Osama bin Laden. So apparently, Ayman al Zawahiri was residing in Kabul city. And on July 31, it was announced that the CIA, the United States CIA, had conducted an airstrike on Mr. Zawahiri in Kabul, and he was killed as a result. And most likely, obviously, this airstrike was carried out from Pakistani territory. So there is, as you can see, Pakistan is back in the US camp. They had stopped allowing the Americans to use Pakistani territory for drone flights and drone operations. Now it's on again. So this was done from Pakistani territory. The drone flew into Afghanistan, and it took out Mr. Al Zawahiri, in his residence in Kabul through using a missile, most likely a Hellfire missile or some other missile uh, of similar capabilities. Yeah, of course, we have never been presented with evidence of the death of Ayman al Zawahiri. No photographic evidence, nothing. The same as Mr. Bin Laden. They announced that we have done this, and we are asked to believe it. So the world's media has taken this, believed this unquestioningly, and reported it as if it has happened. Maybe it's happened, but we have never been presented with any actual evidence. But anyway, that's something that happened at the end of July this year. Then you have this unfortunate event in Pakistan between June and October 2022, the Pakistan floods. Terrible flooding in Pakistan because of excessive rainfall during the Indian monsoon. Pakistan is obviously part of the Indian subcontinent. It's on, yeah, we know where it is. I don't have to remind you. So the Indian monsoon on the Pakistani side was very strong this time. Yes, excessive rainfall, which caused this massive spate of flooding from June all the way into mid October or so, 2022. Enormous economic damage. Yeah, the damage has been approximated to be around the $15 billion mark. That much damage, and another $15 billion or so of economic losses in Pakistan as a byproduct, as an after effect of all of this flooding. So yes, there was, and I don't know how many lives have been lost. Definitely more than 1,000, way more than 1,000. I assume. I remember reading about at least 1,000 lives that were lost as a consequence of the flooding. So very unfortunate for our neighbors in Pakistan, our Pakistani brothers and sisters. Terrible. And one thing that is curious is that in the city of, I don't know, was it Harappa or Mohenjo-daro? In the city, I think it was Harappa. So the flooding happened all across the place, but in Harappa, the flooding was drained out very quickly because of the 5,000-year-old drainage system of Harappa city. So that 5,000-year-old drainage system, which our ancestors constructed all the 5 millennia ago, it still works, and it drained out all of the excess water from this place. So that's curious. The drainage system that our ancestors built, five, okay, it was Mohenjo-daro. Mazar Chachar says Mohenjo-daro. All right, it's Mohenjo-daro. So this drainage system that our ancestors, the ancestors of Indians, Pakistanis, Afghans, all of them, our ancestors, they built 5 millennia ago, it still works, and it's superior to the drainage systems that we have within the Indian subcontinent today, which is rather strange. One would laugh if it were not a tragedy. Yeah. So yes, that is the terrible thing that happened in Pakistan. I do not have any sense of Schadenfreude. Yes, it is indeed genuinely a sad event. You don't want to see any loss of life anywhere. Yeah, and most of the people who are affected, either directly or indirectly, are, well, common civilians. Yeah, so yeah, that's something that happened, and it's very unfortunate. Then we come to the situation in the United Kingdom. The merry-go-round of the prime minister's position. So you had Mr. Boris Johnson, who became the prime minister of the UK in 2019, mid July or so, in 2019. So he was ousted from power for whatever reasons in September 2022. 6th of September 22, he was ousted from power. He essentially resigned from his position as prime minister. Then the same day, Liz Elizabeth Truss took over as the prime minister of the UK on September 6th, and she resigned on October 25. She was in power for 50 days. She was not in power, but she was in the seat of the prime minister of the UK for 50 days, the shortest ever tenure of any prime minister of the UK, as far as as I know. Yeah, just 50 days. She lasted 50 days, and then Mr. Rishi Sunak, the Indian origin politician, became the prime minister of the UK on October 25, and he is still the prime minister of the UK. Let's see how long his tenure lasts. Typically nowadays the UK has become just like Japan. The prime minister's position is something that undergoes a merry-go-round. They come and go, they come and go, they do nothing of any significance, and nobody remembers after a few years was in who was the prime minister in a certain year. So you had people like Gordon Brown. uh, who else was there? You had Mr. Cameron was there, and there was the other lady. What's her name? I forget the lady's name. I apologize. I do not mean to disrespect anyone, but I can't remember the other lady's name. What was her name? Yeah, sorry, I can't remember the other lady's name. So it's kind of a merry-go-round. It's kind of a revolving door. So right now we have Mr. Rishi Sunak, who is the prime minister of the UK, and let's see how long that lasts. Uh, as we all know, the UK is a US, like we say, Theresa May. Joseph Stalin reminds me, Theresa May. Yeah. So the UK is a US vassal state, and it doesn't really matter who is the prime minister of the UK, because they all are handed a script that they have to read from. Yeah. So yeah, it's currently Mr. Rishi Sunak, and Mr. Rishi Sunak obviously was overjoyed, as anybody should be, to become the prime minister of their nation, and he participated in the G20 summit. He's the only leader who looked kind of happy. Everybody else, all the other G7 leaders who were part of the G20 summit, did not look very happy. But Mr. Rishi Sunak was clearly happy because he was a newly minted prime minister. Yeah. So Mr. Rishi Sunak is now the prime minister of the UK. Um, in August, that what's the speaker of the U.S. House, was it Nancy Pelosi, the speaker of one of the two houses of the uh, U.S. government? She, yeah, most likely the lower house. She visited Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan on a 2-day visit in early August 2022, on August 2. And she went there in the face of very strong Chinese protests and threats. The Chinese essentially threatened to invade Taiwan and shoot down the plane and God knows what. All kinds of extremely strong threats were issued by the Chinese because of the impending visit of Nancy Pelosi to China to Taiwan. She went ahead anyway. She was there on August 2 and August 3, and she did whatever she was supposed to do. She did all the various political and international engagements that she had planned in Taiwan, and then she departed from Taiwan. So the visit went off smoothly. The Chinese could do nothing. Yeah, all their threats turned out to be empty. In retaliation, in response, the Chinese conducted a very, very extensive military exercises around Taiwan. The Chinese military essentially encircled Taiwan from August 4 to August 7. It looked like for a time, like they would impose a long blockade on the island of Taiwan, but then after August 7, it kind of dissipated. So their threats turned out to be threats in vain. Yes, for all their military might and all that, the Chinese are in no position to take back Taiwan. And they were forced at the last minute to, well, not make their threats come true. So, so it's clear that that the Chinese are in no position, even today, despite whatever military strength they have, to even take back their neighboring island, which they claim as their own, from the US, which is an entire ocean and a half away. Yeah. So that kind of tells you the dilemma that the Chinese have. Their economy has been, well, it's been devastated by the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah. uh, and their military strength is great on paper. They now have the largest navy in the world numerically, and yet they are not even in a position to take back Taiwan, which is right next door to them. So that's something that happened in August. It was, you could say, in a way, a kind of humiliation for the Chinese. And the Chinese netizens were very upset about this. They went on their social media site, Weibo, or whatever it is, and they expressed certain opinions that were very quickly scrubbed and censored. So that's what happened. In September, we had the commissioning of the INS Vikrant, the first indigenously built aircraft carrier of India. So it was commissioned into the Indian Navy on September 2 by the Prime Minister of India. Now, I have, as you know, regular viewers of this channel will know that I have always argued against India inducting aircraft carriers. Yes, because of a variety of reasons. You are concentrating your lethality into one ship. It is always a better alternative to distribute your lethality across numerous combat vessels and assets of the Indian Navy and distribute it geographically over a wide area instead of concentrating everything in one place. So my argument is very clear. We have limited resources, limited money. You can build a large number of highly lethal surface and subsurface naval assets for the price of one aircraft carrier, and you can distribute them over a large area instead of concentrating everything in one place. So my argument is very simple, that it is a better use of the limited resources and money to instead of building aircraft carriers, build other kinds of surface vessels and submarines and spread them out, and that would distribute the Indian Navy's lethality across the area of our interest. Anyhow, now we have two aircraft carriers, the Vikramaditya and the Vikrant. It's good. They will certainly serve a certain purpose. All I would say is that let's not invest more billions of dollars into one more. Let's rather use that money elsewhere, um, in whatever way serves the Indian national interest from the naval perspective the best. But the fact that India was able to build an aircraft carrier entirely indigenously is testament to India's engineering and scientific prowess. It tells you that India can build ships of that size and capability entirely on its own. That is a fantastic achievement. I would like to congratulate the engineers and the scientists and whoever else is involved in this. And that tells you that India can, with the right amount of money, start producing lots of naval assets, destroyers, corvettes, and other kinds of ships. We also have an existing Scorpene submarine production line. We should not let that fall out of use into disrepair. So yeah, the Indian Navy needs to step up to the plate and counter the rising Chinese threat in the Indian Ocean region, and that can only happen if the political leadership is willing to do that. We are seeing the willingness to do that. We are seeing new naval assets being built and commissioned. We need to have more of that in order to be able to counter the Chinese threat numerically in the Indian Ocean. Quantity has a quality of its own. That's what Joseph Stalin said. So that's something that's an adage that is true, and that's something we need to keep in mind. And hopefully our military planners, etc., are gonna keep that in mind, hopefully. So that's something that happened in 2022 September. INS Vikrant was commissioned. Great job to everyone concerned. Then in September we had the demise, the demise of the Queen of England, the British Queen Elizabeth II. She died at a very advanced age. She was in her 90s, if I'm not mistaken. She died on September 8th, and her son Charles III, Prince Charles, now became King Charles III, in a shocking act of undemocratic nepotism. Yeah, just because he was born to her as the eldest son, or whatever reason, that's why he was made the King of England. There was no democratic election in England for the king. The king obviously is the royalty, the monarchy is a completely undemocratic institution. Yes. So these nations that lecture India about democracy, etc., they themselves follow these extremely undemocratic and archaic traditions of having a king or a queen, and the system of monarchy with people who are in line for the throne and all that. Yeah, shocking act of undemocratic nepotism. making Charles III the king of England. Anyhow, so they have a king now, and they would say, "Long live or God save whatever the king," etc. Yeah, good for them. Cheerio. So the lady died on September 8th, the brutal Queen of England. Yes, under whose rule lots of brutality has been perpetrated by the British. Yeah, she, in a sense, continued the traditions of her ancestors of uh, of having colonies, of interfering in the internal affairs of various nations in Africa and Asia undemocratically, and so on. The 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 Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya was brutally crushed under her leadership. Lots of atrocities were perpetrated, and so much more. So she was no different from anybody else, from any of her ancestors. So she died on September 8th. Her son was made the king. The Queen's funeral, the Queen of England's funeral, the British Queen's funeral, was on September 19. And for some reason, apparently it was the most watched TV event in human history, in world history. um, and I'm sure lots of people from India must have also watched it, which I find perplexing, but that's human nature. Yeah. Then in September itself, September, we had an escalation of the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. Yeah, there were clashes in mid September, between September 10 to September 15, clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan, all instigated by Azerbaijan. This is a continuation of the 2021 border conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which again was initiated and instigated by the Azerbaijanis. Yes. Um, and it's typically the Azerbaijanis who are coming out on top. They are perpetrating the standard Turkic brutalities on the hapless and unfortunate people of Armenia. Armenia is an ancient nation that is, well, the Turkic peoples essentially have targeted it for extermination. They want to create a Trans-Turan corridor or whatever, and this one nation is in the way. So that's the situation. So Turkey is supporting Azerbaijan, Israel is supporting Azerbaijan, India is supporting Armenia. That's where we are. So that's something that happened in September this year. Again, in the middle of September, September 15 and 16, we had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Mr. Modi went there, Mr. Xi Jinping was there, and various other leaders were there. And Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi Jinping did not interact with each other. They did not as much as nod to each other and say hello. So that tells you how cold and how poor the India-China relationship was in September, as a consequence of the 2020 Galwan clash, in which close to 100 Chinese soldiers died, and 20 Indian soldiers died. Yes. So, and it is all China's fault. They are the ones who are initiating and instigating these border clashes by attempting to cross over into Indian territory. Yeah, they already hold Aksai Chin illegally. They already hold the Shaksgam corridor illegally. They already hold Tibet illegally. So the Chinese are the problem here. So the SCO summit came and went without any interaction between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping. Yes, and then something curious happened. So the summit ended. The SCO summit ended on September 16, and that very day, Mr. Xi Jinping went back to Beijing. He landed in Beijing on September 16, and then he disappeared for about 10 days. And there were these massive swirling rumors of a coup against Mr. Xi Jinping. Some people speculated, some publications speculated that he had been arrested. He was under house arrest. He had been deposed by some Chinese general of the so-called PLA, People's Liberation Army. All kinds of rumors were making the rounds um, in the media and in social media, and so on. So for about 10 days, Mr. Xi Jinping was invisible. He disappeared from the public eye. Typically, as the president of China, as the leader of China, you are visible every day. You have public appearances every day. So he disappeared for about 10 days, and we don't quite know what happened. There were rumors of a coup. I speculated that there was a consolidation of power happening in China uh, in uh, in advance of the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, which was supposed to happen in mid-October. Yeah, so mid-September, Mr. Xi Jinping disappears. Maybe there was an internal purge happening, a consolidation of power within the Chinese Communist Party by Mr. Xi Jinping himself. getting rid of opposition, arresting dissidents, and God knows what. So the details of what happened have never ever been made public. But Mr. Xi Jinping obviously reappeared. He reappeared stronger than ever. And in October, for a week or so, there was a week long event in Beijing, the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, in which Mr. Xi Jinping was elected, selected, whatever you want to call it, for an unprecedented third term as the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. So he is now essentially the de facto emperor of China. And the Chinese Communist Party is essentially the de facto ruling imperial dynasty of China. So his position has been totally consolidated. All his opposition has been removed, more or less. And there was the very unedifying spectacle of the removal of former President Mr. Hu Jintao from this event. Very public and kind of humiliating spectacle. He is the former general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, a very elderly man. He was removed by two plainclothes uh, guys, strong guys, who lifted him up and pulled him out. So that was quite strange, quite unedifying, kind of humiliating for Mr. Hu Jintao. He was sitting right next to Mr. Xi Jinping, and this happened. Anyway, they have tried to explain it off in a variety of ways, but that's what happened during this event, the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And Mr. Xi Jinping has consolidated his power. He is in for a third term, which has never happened before. He is essentially the emperor of China now. Um, in October, you had elections in Brazil. Mr. Lula da Silva has defeated the incumbent leader, Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, in a runoff election. Neither candidate was able to secure a majority in the first round of voting. So then there was a runoff election, and Mr. Lula was able to defeat Mr. Jair Bolsonaro, and he is soon going to become the new leader of Brazil, as per the procedure. In November, we had a legislative election in Israel. So Israel also has a kind of revolving door kind of situation when it comes to the prime ministership. Mr. Naftali Bennett was originally, a couple of years ago, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister. Then Mr. Naftali Bennett became the prime minister. Then Mr. Yair Lapid became the prime minister. Now there was this election in November in Israel, and the result of the election was that a Netanyahu-led coalition was able to secure the majority. And just a couple of days ago, just yesterday, Mr. Netanyahu was sworn in as the new prime minister of Israel. He is described by the West, by the BBC and other publications, as a very hardline right-wing prime minister. And yeah, well, they don't seem to like him very much for whatever reason. Yeah. So anyway, Mr. Netanyahu is back in the saddle as the prime minister of Israel. And as we know, he shares a very good, strong, warm relationship with India's prime minister, Mr. Modi. So that augurs well for the India-Israel relationship going forward. Like I've said many times, I would like the India-Israel relationship to grow stronger and more robust in the future. We have a significant convergence of geopolitical interests, and we should certainly take advantage of that in a way that is mutually beneficial for both nations. So Mr. Netanyahu is back in the saddle, and let's see how that goes. But overall, it's a good sign for the India-Israel relationship. In November, we had the US midterm elections. Yeah. And the result, I've spoken about this at length. The Republicans were able to win the lower house. The Democrats were able to retain the Senate, the upper house. Yeah. So one of the surprises is that this was not the elections did not end up as a red wave, as former President Trump had predicted. It was supposed to be a red wave. The Republicans were supposed to sweep the House and the Senate. They lost the Senate, and they barely won the lower house. Yeah. But they are now in control of the lower house. Yes. And Mr. Trump is kind of diminished as the largest or the tallest leader of the Republican Party. Yeah. Because it was under his leadership that this red sweep was supposed to happen, which did not happen. So it's kind of diminished his stature. The Republicans are now in control of the lower house. And I had predicted that once they win the lower house, they will launch investigations into the conduct of the current democratic government of the US under the leadership of Mr. Joe Biden. And that's exactly what happened. Just 4, 5, 6 days after they won, they launched the first set of investigations. So that's something that happened in November. In mid-November, November 15, 16, we had the G20 summit in Bali. Yes. uh, the budget of the G20 summit was about 700 billion Indonesian rupiahs for the entire package of G20 events. It was held in Bali in Indonesia under the leadership, the presidency of Indonesia. So, from our perspective, Mr. Modi met with various world leaders, including Mr. Biden. Uh, Mr. Modi also very briefly spoke with President Xi Jinping of China, a brief informal chat for a couple of minutes during an official event. Uh, so that was the first initiative taken by either leader to kind of break the ice between the two nations. So Mr. Modi took the initiative of standing up and going up to Mr. Xi and having a brief conversation with Mr. Xi Jinping. That's what happened. That was the most significant event from our perspective that came out of the G20 summit in Bali. The other interesting event is that at the same time there was this Ukrainian missile strike in Poland, which killed at least a couple of Polish civilians. And the Ukrainians tried to claim that it was a Russian missile strike. Yeah, they lied. They knew what had happened. They tried to essentially spark off World War III, and there was an emergency meeting in Bali, which was headed by Mr. Biden, and his various vassals were present around him. Mr. Olaf Scholz of Germany, Mr. Rishi Sunak, who looked very happy, Monsieur Macron of France, Madame Giorgia Meloni of Italy, and various other leaders. Yeah, G7 and EU leaders uh, were there. Um, and thankfully, there was no precipitation of hostilities, and everyone realized it is the Ukrainians who have launched this missile attack, and they're lying and they're claiming it's Russia. So that was something that happened during the G20 summit. In November this year, we had the Nepalese general election, the for a new government, for a new prime minister. In the Nepalese setup, political setup, you have a House of Representatives, which is the parliament, which has 275 members. 165 members are elected through direct voting. You go and vote. Yeah, about 110 are elected through proportional electoral system, whatever that means. And in the House of Representatives, you need 138 seats for the majority. So the government, the prime minister was Mr. Sher Bahadur Deuba, who was the prime minister since July 2021. He was the leader of the Nepali Congress and the coalition of various allies, the CPN, Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist Center, the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Socialist, and so on. This is a pro. So Mr. Sher Bahadur Deuba is a pro-India politician. Yes, his coalition won 89 seats. The opposition alliance, the pro-China alliance of Mr. KP Sharma Oli, it won 78 seats. Yeah, so neither was able to reach the halfway mark of 138. And the third largest party was the party of Mr. Pushpa Kumar Dahal, or also known as Comrade Prachanda, the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist Center, which won 49 seats. And now, as a result of all of this and the various politicking and horse trading that happens, Mr. Pushpa Kumar Dahal, Comrade Prachanda, is now the prime minister. Yeah, he was part of the coalition of Mr. Sher Bahadur Deuba, which is a pro-India coalition. So now there is speculation whether the Chinese have been able to influence the elections, whether they have been able to engineer this turnaround, that Mr. Prachanda is now the prime minister. Time will tell what's actually happening, but Nepal is a strategically important nation for India. We cannot allow too much Chinese influence within that nation. It is all because of the fault of previous Indian governments in the 1980s and 1990s that we have reached the situation. The constitutional monarchy that Nepal had was destroyed, and the Maoists and pro-China elements have now a very large stake in Nepalese politics. So eventually, India will have to take care of Nepal, because we cannot allow Nepal to go the way of Tibet. And the Chinese are already encroaching on significant portions of Nepalese territory as we speak right now. So at the end of the day, just like Bhutan, Nepal has to be India's responsibility. The Nepalese may or may not like India. That is immaterial. We cannot allow Nepal to go the Tibet way. Yeah. So that is something that India will have to keep in mind. And this is a situation that India needs to keep a very close watch on. In December, what happened? Tawang happened, the India-China border clash in Arunachal Pradesh near the Tawang sector. Yeah. So the Chinese, as usual, the Chinese so-called PLA, People's Liberation Army, which I like to call the People's Enslavement Army, they tried to encroach into the Indian territory. So the border is kind of undemarcated. Neither side has agreed. It is all thanks to China that the border is undemarcated. They have repeatedly refused to sit down and negotiate and demarcate the border once and for all. So as a result, both sides claim certain territories, and both sides have, like they say, certain perceptions of the territory. And the Chinese tried to encroach into Indian territory. And as a result, there was a scuffle, uh, hand-to-hand combat or whatever, through using melee weapons. Like typically a melee weapon is something you don't throw. It's not something you can throw as a projectile. Is a range weapon that includes guns and all that. Melee weapons are sticks and clubs and things like that. So there was a clash using melee weapons. The Chinese had a numerical superiority initially, but they were not aware of the fact that India was able to bring in reinforcements very rapidly, and then the tide turned and the Chinese suffered a significant beating. We don't know exact. What's been told is that both sides suffered some injuries, nothing very serious. There are reports that the Chinese suffered catastrophic injuries, as in broken skulls and opened skulls, which essentially means death. But no report has been made public. So that is something that happened in December. So now understand this. India-China relations were terrible, very poor since 2020, after the Galwan clash, which was instigated and initiated by the Chinese. Yeah. Then in the G20 summit, during the G20 summit, Mr. Modi in November took the initiative to break the ice and speak with Mr. Xi Jinping in an effort to kind of to start normalizing relations between India and China. And less than a month later, the Chinese they create this new provocation, this new aggression. So essentially, Mr. Xi Jinping is rebuffing the attempt by India, by Mr. Modi, to kind of ameliorate the relationship between India and China. It looks like he wants the relationship to stay bad. Yeah. So that is what happened in December. The Chinese have suffered a beating, as they usually do. Their soldiers aren't the best quality. Yeah. And so on. So the relationship between India and China is back to where it was. It's bad again. Yeah. The other thing that came out of 2022 is the possibility of the expansion of Brics. So lots of nations have applied to become part of Brics. Algeria, Argentina, Iran, Indonesia have applied to become members of the Brics coalition. Brics is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The real main powerful nations, the core nations, are Russia, India, China, RIC. So these other nations now want to become part of Brics. Algeria, Argentina, Indonesia, and Iran. And other nations are also interested, such as Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, Kazakhstan, Nicaragua, Egypt, Afghanistan, Senegal, the UAE. I believe Thailand is also very interested, Nigeria also. So Brics is certainly very, very attractive to essentially the non-Western nations that do not wish to remain under the boot of the G20, of the G7 nations, of the NATO nations, of the EU nations. Yeah, essentially nations in Africa which seek independence. Africa is still completely colonized, whether you know it or not. They will teach you in your history lessons and textbooks that the era of colonization was before World War I and World War II. That is not true. Africa is still almost entirely colonized. Yes. So various nations across the world would like to see a new global order, or an alternative to the existing order, emerge, and that is why Brics is so attractive to many of these nations. Of course, for Brics to work, India and China need to find a way of coexisting harmoniously and peacefully to some extent, which is not the case right now. Yeah. But that's something that came out of the year 2022. And of course, there were many other events in 2022. There were coups and regime changes in Africa, in South America, etc., that I have not covered. Obviously, I cannot talk for hours. So many things happened. So there were coups and regime change operations in Africa, in South America. If you're interested, look it up. Yeah, there were elections in various nations that have thrown up various kinds of governments. There were elections in various Indian states. We, of course, had the Football World Cup, the T20 World Cup, various sporting events. So lots and lots has happened in 2022. I cannot cover it all, but please don't say that I have forgotten to say something. I have chosen to cover certain specific events. There's a lot more. There is a lot more that has happened, and I have not forgotten anything. I've only chosen to cover certain things. So lots has happened. Now, I would like to talk about what could happen in 2023. What do we need to keep an eye on? But before we do that, let's take a look at what the Russians have to say about this. Let me put something on the screen. So, what do we have? So, Mr. Dmitry Medvedev, in case you don't know, Mr. Dmitry Medvedev is the current deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, and he was the president of Russia uh, between 2008 and 2012. He was the placeholder president of Russia. The real power is obviously Mr. Putin. So here is Mr. Medvedev's predictions about what could happen in 2023. I tweeted about it. I said it's an epic, funny thread, mostly absurd and worth a read. And many people said that, asked me why I think it's absurd. Many people disagreed with me. So let's analyze what Mr. Medvedev is saying. Uh, he says that the oil price will rise to $150 a barrel and gas price will top $5 per cubic meters, 5,000 per cubic meters. I'm not sure, 1,000 cubic meters. Uh, it is a possibility. Certainly, oil prices could rise significantly, especially if the Russians link the price of oil to the price of gold, which is linked to the price of the ruble. If they do that, the oil prices could rise significantly, and so could gold prices and the value of the Russian ruble. So yes, oil and gas is something the Russians can actually control, so it could happen. What is the oil price right now? What is the price of oil right now? Let's take a look at oilprice.com. What does it say? Oilprice.com. What does oil price? So the Brent crude is currently at $84.22 per barrel. That's the price of Brent crude, and we have the other crudes also. Natural gas is 4417 per unit, and so on. So it is certainly possible that this prediction number one, could come true. It is a possibility. It's not something you should laugh at. The UK will rejoin the EU. I don't see that happening. The UK exited from the EU as part of the Brexit process. Now we know that the UK is controlled remotely from across the Atlantic by the US. So what's the point of removing it from the EU and bringing it back into the EU? I find it unlikely to happen that the UK will rejoin the EU. The EU will collapse after the UK's return. Euro will drop out of use as the former EU currency. That I believe is unlikely, because for number three to happen, number two needs to happen. The euro will still remain a major currency, but its value could depreciate definitely. Number four is Poland and Hungary will occupy western regions of the formerly existing Ukraine. That could possibly happen. For that to happen, the Russians will need to occupy everything west of the regions adjacent to Poland and Hungary, which could certainly happen in the coming months. It could certainly happen. The Russians are capable of doing that. Taking Kiev. Let's go to the map very quickly. Do we have a map somewhere? Do we have a map? Let me stop the screen and put the map on the screen. And where are we? Here's the map. So here is Ukraine. So if the Russians take over, they have taken much of Donbass. If they take Odessa, they cut off access to the Black Sea for Ukraine. And then they take, Kharkiv and Dnipro and even Kiev. Then the western region, the western part of Ukraine, could possibly become eventually part of Poland or Hungary. They could possibly take it over if the Americans allow them to do that. We have to understand that Poland and Hungary are both EU member states, so they will not be able to do anything without the approval of the true power within the European Union, which is the United States. So it is an unlikely possibility, but you cannot completely rule that out. Number five is really funny. The Fourth Reich will be created, encompassing the territory of Germany and its satellites, Poland, Baltic states, Czechia, Slovakia, Kiev Republic, and other outcasts. The Fourth Reich, the last Reich was the Third Reich under the Nazi regime of Adolf Hitler. Um, as we know, Germany is a US vassal, as is every other EU or NATO nation. Germany is under permanent US military occupation. Germany doesn't have any leader that could have the wherewithal to take Germany in an independent direction. So I think that this tweet is meant to be humorous. It is not an actual prediction. If a Fourth Reich does emerge, it could emerge only if the Americans give the directive for that to happen. So I think that's very unlikely, and it's most likely a humorous prediction. A war will break out between France and the Fourth Reich. Europe will be divided, Poland repartition in the process. That is obviously very unlikely. For that, the Fourth Reich has to be created, and France has to be an independent nation with an independent foreign policy, which it is not quite not quite so. So once again, that is a humorous prediction. Northern Ireland will separate from the UK and join Republic of Ireland. That can happen only if the Americans allow that to happen. Yeah. Civil war will break out in the US. California and Texas becoming independent states. That is not going to happen in the next foreseeable future, which I mean next 5-10 years. It's impossible for that to happen. Texas and Mexico will form an allied state. Elon Musk will win the presidential election in a number of states after the civil wars end, will be given to the GOP. It's meant to be funny and humorous. All the largest stock markets and financial activity will leave the US and Europe and move to Asia. Some of that could definitely happen in 2023 with the rise of India and other Asian economies. That could certainly happen, but I don't see all of it leaving the US and Europe and moving entirely to Asia. The Bretton Woods system of monetary management will collapse, leading to the IMF and World Bank crash. Euro and dollar will stop circulating as the global reserve currencies. Digital fiat currencies will be actively used instead. Some of that could happen. The Bretton Woods system obviously ended sometime in the 1970s, yes, but the system that we have today is essentially a continuation of that. The US dollar was unpegged from the price of gold. It became the petrodollar. That's what happened in the 1970s when Mr. Nixon was the president of the US and Mr. Kissinger was the Secretary of State. So this is a desired end state for Russia, for the IMF and World Bank crash and the euro and dollar to stop circulating as the reserve currency. Some of that could possibly happen in 2023, especially if a Brics currency is created, which is tied to a basket of commodities which are real world in nature, as opposed to the debt that the US dollar is tied to. Yeah. So yeah, Elon Musk responded, and various other people responded. I think this is mainly a humorous thread. It's meant to be humorous, and some of it betrays what the Russians would like to see happen in the world eventually. But it's very unlikely for that to happen in 2023 itself, which is why I said that this is essentially mostly absurd. Yeah. All right. So some of these things, or many of these things, could eventually end up happening. But to say that it will all happen in 2023 is really genuinely absurd. It could happen possibly over a 10-year horizon. Some of it could happen over a 2-year, 3-year horizon. Some of it could happen over a 5-year horizon. Some of it over 10 to 20 years, and some of it may never happen. Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing. Mostly it was about creating a humorous and funny thread. So Mr. Medvedev has certainly succeeded from that perspective. It is indeed a humorous and funny thread that he has created on now. So that's about Mr. Medvedev. Now, what are the things that could happen in 2023? Please understand, I am not making predictions. I am speculating. So the speculation is like this. We know what the world looks like today. We know what the parameters are. We know what the major nations and powers want. We know the various forces that are currently playing against each other in various parts of the world. We know which system is predominant. We know there is the possibility of the creation of a different system, parallel system, competing system. These are the possibilities that could ensue. This is mainly informed speculation. It is not predictions. Yeah. So what could happen in 2023? First of all, there could be, like we have discussed lots of times, a major winter offensive, military offensive by Russia in Ukraine, because the Rasputitsa season has ended, and now there is a specific time window of 2 or maximum 3 months in which the Russians can make a major move to achieve whatever objectives they have in Ukraine. So one could see there is a high likelihood, and now analysts across the world are now saying this. There is a high likelihood of a major Russian winter military offensive in Ukraine that could potentially change the map of the Ukraine region, possibly for a very long time, if not permanently. So that is something that could happen definitely in January or February. Yeah, most likely. What else could happen in 2023? We had the US midterm elections. Yes, the Republicans have won the lower house, the House they call it, and they have launched an initial set of investigations. I think 2023 could be the year of investigations. The Republicans could launch lots and lots of investigations, and try to impede everything the democratic the Democrats try to do. Yeah, they could essentially stalemate the functioning of the government, turning Joe Biden into a lame duck president, and they could launch all kinds of investigations into the conduct of the Democratic Party. Recently, we had the FTX trading scam. Uh, FTX Trading Limited is a company that is owned by Sam Bankman-Fried, right? It's a cryptocurrency exchange, a crypto hedge fund. It has gone bankrupt. It's a massive scam. It has essentially led to the crash of the crypto markets. Yeah, so there could be an investigation into that, into the dealings of FTX, into the relationship that Sam Bankman-Fried has with the Republican Party, what kind of money was exchanged, all that. There could be that. There could be more investigations into the president's son, Mr. Hunter Biden, the laptop thing and all that. There could be investigations into the various deals that Joe Biden has had in China, in Ukraine, the various Biden family deals in various parts of the world, especially in China and Ukraine. There could be an investigation into the disastrous US withdrawal from Afghanistan. The way the withdrawal was conducted was terrible. Yeah, so there could be investigations into that. There could be investigations into Dr. Fauci, into the Pfizer vaccine, into the myocarditis deaths, the deaths because of blood clots. How effective or efficacious this vaccine is, how dangerous the vaccine is all of this data has now come to light. It is no longer a conspiracy theory. Yeah, so there could be investigations into that. So I think 2023 could very much end up being the year of investigations, and investigations designed to prevent the Democratic Party from functioning and running the country properly. Mr. Joe Biden could end up becoming a lame duck president who was able to achieve nothing, and the Democrats may be able to push no legislation through, which could essentially paralyze the government, the functioning of the government. So that is something we could see in the year 2023. Now, talking about the US and the midterms, 2024 is going to be the election year in the US. Yeah, the next presidential election is going to be held in 2024. So 2023 is definitely going to be the year of the presidential election campaign, which is going to be kicked off into high gear. It's going to be a year of many presidential announcements. Lots of candidates will throw their hats into the ring. We know that Trump has already announced his presidential candidature for 2024. We have Ron DeSantis, who could be his prime challenger, or if not the prime challenger, the prime candidate from the Republicans, eclipsing Trump, possibly. Yeah. From the Democratic Party, we have names like Gavin Newsom that are doing the rounds. There is also the possibility. I mean, look at Mr. Joe Biden. Is he competent to run a nation? Is he in the right state of mind, or is he already senile? You see him every day. He doesn't even know what he's doing at times. And Kamala Harris, the less we say about the lady, the better, because she has proven herself to be completely clueless about everything that she speaks about. Yeah. So the Democratic Party is now in a bind. Traditionally, the sitting president, if he has completed one term, will run for election again. That's traditionally how it has always been. So Mr. Joe Biden has the right to run for election again. He'll be well into his 80s by the time 2024 comes around. There is the strong possibility, I believe, that the Democratic Party, the Democrats, will turn on Biden through the mainstream media. So by mid 23 or something, you could start seeing lots and lots of media reports and stories coming out that Mr. Biden is either mentally unfit or is has not performed well enough or whatever. Yeah. And it could happen that he may be made to step down or resign or announce that he will not stand for re-election. That is a possibility that we have to keep keep in mind. I think there is a strong chance that Mr. Biden will not run in 24, and neither will the lady Kamala Harris. There is a strong possibility that the Democrats will throw up a whole new set of candidates. Yeah. So that's something that could certainly happen. So let's keep an eye on this. 2023 could be the year of a global recession, all precipitated by the Ukraine conflict. Oil prices could rise. It's a possibility. Petroleum products could see the prices rise. There could be a food shortage because of what's happening in Ukraine. And the global south, so-called third world nations, especially in Africa, could suffer the most from this. There could be a shortage of various commodities. So there is a strong likelihood of a global recession, which could also affect India. Yeah. So that is something that is a possibility in 2023. When it comes to India, the Indian economy has now emerged from the COVID pandemic era. The economy is doing well, quite well. It is the best performing economy among all the major nations, the large nations. Yeah. So we could see economic growth in India along the same lines in 2023. I expect India's economic growth to remain strong. I expect a strong emphasis on made in India. I think there is going to be a further exodus from China from the manufacturing perspective. Yeah. China has this terrible COVID situation which is still going on. Manufacturing has taken a major hit. The Chinese economy has taken a major hit. I believe more and more companies will try to exit China, and then the alternative is India. So there could be a growth of in the made in India uh, sector. So you could see more and more American companies and other nations companies coming to India and setting up manufacturing plants and operations within India, which is a great thing for the Indian economy. So I believe the Indian economy will keep doing well despite the possibility of a recession in the year 2023. Now, talking about the economy, we have the Indian rupee. We have spoken about this, I think, in the previous episode or the one before that. Uh, we now have the rupee trade settlement mechanism that various nations have started using, which means that these nations can use rupees instead of dollars for international transactions in trade. Sri Lanka has already announced that it's doing this. Mauritius is already part of this, and other nations like Tajikistan, Luxembourg, Sudan, Cuba, etc., are strongly interested in the rupee trade settlement mechanism, in using rupees instead of dollars or other currencies for international trade. Yeah. Russia has also now started foreign trade settlements in Indian rupees and in the Chinese yuan and in the Russian ruble. So one of the three major currencies that the Russians are using is the Indian rupee for foreign trade settlements. What does it mean? It means that any nation that wants to purchase Russian oil can now pay Russia using Indian rupees. That is a major step forward for the Indian rupee, which now makes it one of the major international currencies. So I expect this to be taken forward in the year 2023. I would say I expect that more nations, especially smaller nations, especially nations with smaller economies, will start gravitating towards using the Indian rupee for international trade settlements and all that. So this again augurs well for the Indian economy. The Indian UPI system, Unified Payments Interface, is now being adopted slowly and gradually by various nations. You could see that also continuing in 2023. So overall, things look good for the Indian rupee, for the Indian economy, for Indian manufacturing, and for India overall from the economic perspective, which is very important for India because, like I keep saying, India has to anyhow keep on growing its economy. This is non-negotiable for the next 10 years minimum. India's economy has to grow at 7, 8, 9, 10%. Maybe 10% is too high a barrier, too far ashore, but at least minimum 7%, 8% it has to happen. So we are most likely on track for that, and the Indian government needs to keep on performing along these lines. Yeah. um from the perspective of China, this could be a hard year for them. Their economy is not doing well. The COVID pandemic has been disastrous for China. The reason for this is that the Chinese vaccine doesn't work. The Chinese vaccine is perhaps the worst of all the vaccines that various nations have developed. Yes. And if you see India, everyone is vaccinated, no one cares anymore. The situation is back to normal. The nation is open again, back open for business. The economy is performing very well, and nobody really thinks too much about the pandemic anymore, except when the media tries to create a panic. Yeah, the Indian media has this propensity of trying to engineer artificial panics. Yeah, but we know that the Indian COVID vaccine is, if not the best, then one of the very best vaccines available in the world right now. And the vaccines that India has used, apart from the Indian vaccine, whatever vaccines India has used have been good vaccines. We have not allowed Pfizer to introduce its vaccine into India, the mRNA vaccine. So India has done the right things. India has emerged with its reputation greatly enhanced out of the coronavirus pandemic. The Chinese have not even emerged from the pandemic. Their reputation has been, well, it's turned to dust. The world believed that the Chinese scientists are the best in the world or among the best in the world. Well, look at the vaccine they have produced. A terrible vaccine, a highly inefficacious vaccine, because of which they have had to impose these horrific lockdowns, these inhumane lockdowns on people across the nation. Now they've kind of given up. They've opened up the country, and now we are seeing this terrible spread of the virus all across the country. And well, the media is projecting all kinds of horror stories for China. One hopes it doesn't affect them too badly, but this is going to be a hard year ahead for China because of all the lockdowns and all the steps they've taken. The economy has essentially crawled to a stop. The GDP growth could be negative, if not very small, very minuscule. Manufacturing has taken a huge hit. Chinese exports have taken a huge hit, which is why this is advantage India. But China is facing a hard year ahead. Mr. Xi Jinping is facing a hard year ahead. And it's possibly because of these hardships that the Chinese people are experiencing that he has tried to divert the attention of China in the form of the border clash in Arunachal Pradesh, in which again they have come out second best. So it's a hard year for China ahead. And the US could take actions against China in the trade war. They could ban the Chinese app TikTok. There is a strong, very vociferous demand in the US for banning TikTok, that it's ruining American society and so on. So this could be a hard year ahead for China in a variety of ways. If the Chinese become too desperate as a result of this, you could see Chinese attempts at mischief along the Indian border, along the India-Tibet border. So India will have to be very alert when it comes to this. China is not doing well. But on the other hand, you have the possibility of an expanded Brics, which could help China. The Chinese, their Belt and Road Initiative is dead. They would like to restart it if possible. They could leverage the expanded Brics group as a means of doing that. They could try to look at the Maldives. They could try to look at Afghanistan, possibly China, definitely Iran, definitely Saudi Arabia. They would like to restart their BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, the Maritime Silk Road, all that. Yeah. So BRICS could be a vehicle that they could attempt to leverage for that. And there is the possibility of an expanded BRICS in 2023. Like I said, a bunch of nations have already applied. Argentina, Iran, Indonesia, Algeria have already applied. The Saudis are showing a great deal of interest. The Turks, the Egyptians, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Thailand, UAE, and so many other nations. I mean, so many nations see BRICS as a very attractive alternative to the current rules-based international order, which is essentially run by the Americans per their whims and fancies. So, so the Saudis could gravitate towards BRICS, which is not good news for the imperial alliance, the United States and their rules-based alliance, which could mean that they could attempt a regime change in Saudi Arabia. We are already seeing the publication of various articles in the Western media, in the English-speaking media, which are critical of Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. So you could see the possibility, a possible regime change operation in the Middle East, possibly, or maybe 2023 could be the year of a major Middle East crisis, a flare up of tensions in the Middle East, which could possibly involve Syria, maybe Iraq, maybe Yemen, maybe Israel, maybe Iran. We don't know, but it could possibly be the year of a major Middle East crisis. And obviously, we know who instigates these crises, right? So, and of course, when it comes to BRICS, there is the possibility that a BRICS currency may be introduced in 2023, which could be a significant competitor to the petrodollar, especially if this new BRICS currency is linked to a basket of actual real world commodities like gold, like oil as well, and graphite and uranium and various other things, real world commodities, not just debt. Yeah, what is debt? It is the promise that the Americans give you that the dollar is valuable, and so on. So that is the possibility. We could have an expanded BRICS, the beginning of an expanded BRICS. This process could be set off in 2023, and if BRICS is able to introduce a currency of its own, that would be very interesting, and that will be a major challenge to the US petrodollar. When it comes to the India-China relationship, we should expect more tensions between India and China. We could expect possibly more tensions along the India-Tibet border. Yeah, so the Indian government, the Indian military will have to remain on constant alert, and we will have to enhance our military capabilities, learn the lessons of the Azerbaijan Armenia conflict, learn the lessons of the Ukraine conflict, and we need to incorporate those learned lessons into our military capabilities and practices. So India needs to be really alert vis-a-vis China, and of course vis-a-vis Pakistan. But Pakistan is not that much of a danger. China is the real threat along the India-Tibet border. If the Chinese get desperate, they could try to foment some trouble. And they obviously, the Chinese as well as the Americans, would like to see a new government come to power in India in 2024. They are not happy with the fact that the current government under Prime Minister Modi has a very strong, robust, and completely independent foreign policy. They are prioritizing India's national interest over the national interest and the interest of the Americans and all that, and the Chinese. So that's a possibility. Yeah. So we need to keep a close eye on this. What about Taiwan? I don't see the Chinese invading Taiwan most likely this year. The process of relocating the core group of the core capabilities of TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, has not yet ended. That process is still going on. Once the core capabilities of TSMC are relocated to the US, then Taiwan becomes expendable. And yet, Taiwan is still, even without TSMC, it is still a vital strategic asset for the US in ring fencing China, the Chinese Navy. So I don't think the Americans will give up Taiwan that easily. Yeah. The Secretary of Defense, or whoever it is, Mr. Blinken, made some silly statements in which he said that the Americans can only safeguard one ally at a time. So either Ukraine or Taiwan. That sort of statement was made, which was, I think, a very weak statement. But there we are. So I believe it is unlikely that the Chinese will invade Taiwan this year, but it's definitely on the horizon. Eventually, they would like to do that. Most likely not this year. China, Japan, you could see more tensions this year. The Japanese are ramping up their military budget. They have increased their military budget by more than 26% this year. Yeah, that will definitely set off alarm bells in China. The Chinese do fear Japan. Japan is technologically way ahead of China. It is the most technologically advanced nation and society in the world. They are a dormant nuclear power. If the Americans allow them, they can become a nuclear power next week. Yeah, the The Japanese, they have the capability to do that. They have an extremely sophisticated space program, which means they can produce very sophisticated ballistic missiles. They have some of the best submarines in the world. So the Chinese, they may not say it openly, but they fear Japan. So the Japanese are now ramping up their military budget, which is going to set off alarm bells. In China, there could be more hostilities, whether it's at the diplomatic level or whether it's in the sense of in the form of Chinese encroachments into Japanese territory through their planes and naval assets, etc. You could see more of that happening this year. Yeah. Um, Twitter. So Elon Musk has taken over Twitter. And let's talk about that. So what we find is that Elon Musk has now taken over Twitter, and he has essentially exposed what was happening in Twitter. There was all this misgovernance happening in Twitter, all the corruption that the whole world essentially suspected was there at the hands of Mr. Jack Dorsey, Miss Vijaya Gade, Mr. Parag Agarwal. These people were running Twitter, and it was a deeply corrupt organization. There was all this censorship that was rampant and rife in Twitter, which essentially targeted the non-left, the non-liberals. Yeah, liberal. I mean, into quotes, liberal. It was essentially very politically guided. Yeah. Twitter, 99% of the Twitter staff voted democratic. Yeah, they were democratic voters, Democratic Party. Yeah. So in the US, there is a law which says, there is legislation that says that you cannot be biased when you're hiring people based on their political inclinations. And yet the hiring was all based on political inclinations, right? So corruption, misgovernance, censorship, blatant political bias. The Twitter files that have been coming out has also revealed that there was significant electoral interference in the 2020 US presidential elections. It's also revealed the deep involvement of the US FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, into Twitter. It's all been outed in public under the guidance and leadership of Elon Musk. It's all available on Twitter. Go and look it up. It's not something I'm inventing. It's all there on Twitter. The Twitter files. Search for the hashtag Twitter files, and various journalists, etc., are working on it, and they are revealing new batches of information every few days. So all this has come out in the public. And also about COVID, the COVID files and all that. The funny thing is that nothing new has come out. Whatever has been revealed as part of the Twitter files disclosures is what everybody suspected all along. Nothing new, nothing surprising, nothing shocking has come out. Yeah. So let's take and now we find that Elon Musk is being portrayed as some kind of savior. Let's take a look at what's happening, shall we? Where is it? Okay. So Elon Musk claims that every social media company is engaged in heavy censorship with significant involvement of and at times explicit direction of the US government. Google frequently makes links disappear, for example. Everyone knows this. There is no new revelation in what is being said over here. There is this person who Mr. Musk often retweets. He says that Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft have betrayed you. They sold out to the deep state. Their products and services are used to spy on you and to manipulate you. They are co-conspirators in some of the biggest crimes against humanity, but not Twitter. Matt Wallace says Elon Musk is the only social media billionaire who cares about us more than himself. So you are seeing that now Twitter and Elon Musk are being positioned as the only safe alternative. And to make you believe this, they are now revealing all the Twitter files and what everybody has anyway suspected all along. There is no new surprise that has come out, no surprising revelation. Once again, this Twitter may become a very lucrative investment because it's a free speech alternative opposed to deep state controlled propaganda media. Why would anyone use anyone else? And so on. Elon Musk is a whistleblower who paid $44 billion to share the truth about evil doers around the world. Such a generous gift. Thank you, Elon Musk. Elon Musk is fighting for freedom harder than the Democratic and Republican Party combined. Oh, wow. Understatement of the year. Elon Musk saved 2022. Assange, Snowden, Musk. So Elon Musk is now being elevated to the level of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. Elon Musk says that with rare exception, the FBI seems to want to do the right thing. But there is no question that Twitter operated as a Democratic Party activist machine. Elon Musk says, I am overall very much pro FBI. The agency does a great deal of important work protecting the public. That said, no organization is perfect, and part of the FBI obviously overreached with respect to online censorship and so on and so forth. What's happening now is that they are portraying Twitter 1.0, the Twitter which was pre Elon Musk, as the corrupt, dirty, censorious organization. But now, after Elon Musk has taken over, Twitter is the only safe alternative. All the other social media platforms have betrayed you. They are sold out. They are sold out to the deep state. Yeah, that's what's being said. Elon Musk is being portrayed as the great savior, and they are now trying to convince you that the Twitter that we have now is completely clean. Now the FBI is not involved, and of course, Elon Musk says that he is very much pro FBI, and overall they are good. So what's most likely, and whatever revelations have happened are in no way surprising. It's what everybody suspected all along the past 2 3 years. Everyone knew what kind of censorship was there on Twitter. Everyone knew they were targeting the non-left accounts. Everyone knew what they were doing in India. Everyone knew that the US government is involved in this, and they are using Twitter as a geopolitical tool of influence, and so on. Everyone knew that the Pfizer vaccine is extremely unsafe and dangerous, and that everyone knew what Fauci was up to. All of this has been revealed, but there is no real surprise or shock in anything that's been revealed. So this is a new influence operation. That's what I feel, to make you believe that Twitter is now clean. It is now the only free platform for real free speech, and we need to be careful about this. Yeah. So don't believe what they are trying to make you believe. Most likely, this is a new influence operation. Yeah. So that's about Twitter. What about Pakistan, Afghanistan? I believe that in 2023, the Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship will deteriorate even further, as we are seeing right now. There are significant tensions along the Durand Line, the de facto border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which the Taliban does not recognize. The Taliban claims Pakistani territory, maybe rightfully. Yeah. So I expect that 2023 will see more tensions along the Durand Line and a deterioration in the Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship. What about back home? I expect that in 2023, Bollywood will slide further into irrelevance. Yeah. And I believe that in 2023, alternative film industries will rise. We have seen the rise of the southern film industries, movies like Bahubali, movies like RRR, movies like Kantara, etc. I would like to see other film industries also produce quality content. There are lots of different parts of India where you have movie industries. It would be good. It would be great if Indians start exploring those as well. Yeah, Bollywood, I expect, will slide further into irrelevance, and I expect that people will start exploring alternative and other sources of entertainment. So that's what I expect will happen in 2023. 2023 is also a very important year politically for India. We're going to witness the run up to the 2024 general elections in India. Yeah, so it's a very political year for India. The government of Prime Minister Modi will start making its preparations. Will start gearing up for the big electoral campaign in 2024, and 2023 will set the foundation for that. So 2023 is going to be a very political year for India, and I expect Victoria Nuland to make at least a couple of visits to India. If not her, then some of her minions, somebody closely associated with her. She is the American regime change expert, and the Americans, I believe, would like to see a regime change in India in 2024. India needs to be very careful as to not allow any kind of foreign interference in India's elections. So that's something that India needs to be careful about. Yeah. So 2023 is going to be a very political year, and we're going to see the nation start gearing up for the big general election in 2024. It's going to be a very important year for India. Um, 2023 is the year of India's G20 presidency. It's the chance for India to showcase to the world its achievements, its capabilities, its potential, its soft power, whether it is from the cultural perspective, whether it is from the perspective of politics, from the perspective of governance, from the perspective of science. It's going to be a very important year for India. We need to put our best foot forward and show what we are capable of and what our potential is. So it's the year of the G20 presidency. It's something I'm going to be involved in to some extent at least. So let's see how that goes. I am very optimistic that India will will put forth a spectacular performance during its year of the G20 presidency. And in 2023, I am personally looking forward to the Chandrayaan 3 launch. Uh, we have had two previous iterations of the Chandrayaan program. Chandrayaan 1 in 2008, 2009, Chandrayaan 2 in 2019, which was a partial success, and Chandrayaan 3 is going to be in 2023, most likely in June 2023. So it's going to be a new mission to the moon. It's going to be a lander which will touch down, a soft touchdown on the moon's surface. We need this to happen. I wish our scientists, our engineers at ISRO and everybody else involved in this, I wish them all the best. And I would like to see this succeed. It is very important for India to become one of the major space powers, because by the end of this century, the two or three nations that will lead the world in space exploration will also be the two or three nations that lead the world overall geopolitically. So it is essential for India to not be left behind. The last couple of years, we have been kind of lax. We have been lagging behind, not doing much from the space exploration perspective. We need to start catching up now. So Chandrayaan 3 is due to be launched this year. I wish it great success. I am very eagerly looking forward to that. I also look forward to more progress on the Gaganyaan program, the Indian human space flight program. Yeah. So I believe there's going to be at least one orbital test this year, and most likely in 2024 you will have the first human space flight, the first crewed mission of the Gaganyaan program, which would have maybe one, two, or three astronauts who will do a few orbits of the Earth and then return back to the surface of the Earth. So that's something we expect in 2024. But 2023 is going to be the year in which we make the final preparations for the first crewed mission. And there are many other things also that one looks forward to from the ISRO perspective, from the scientific development perspective. So it's overall going to be a very important and exciting year for us in India. So that is the summary of what I believe could happen in 2023, some of the things that we should look forward to, some of the things that could happen, and let's see how it goes. So with that, I come to the end of today's Indian interest episode, the longest episode thus far. Yeah. So the next episode will be in the year 2023. And the next live stream is on January 1, this Sunday. That's the next Ask Abhijit live stream. So I look forward to seeing you all in that. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. And I will see you in the new year in just a couple of days. Until then, take care.